most people think that imposter syndrome is one thing, that voice in your head that tells you you don't belong. But depending on the type of person you are, that might appear as a couple of different ways. So today I'm going to break down 2 types of imposter syndrome that you might relate to. So the very first thing that I have to do is that I must explain what is imposter syndrome, just in case you're not sure. Because everybody has their own different type of definition, and I want to be clear that we are on the same accord. Despite clear evidence that you're not. So when I say clear evidence, that could be the accomplishments that you have, the education, the degree that you have, the experiences that you have, right? Depending, you could be in your field, you could be an expert in your field for the past 10 years, right? So you know what you're talking about. However, you still have, once again, this feeling, this experience of feeling like a fraud, right? And that shows up as self-doubt. Not only do you feel like a fraud, but you also believe that everything that you have, either you got the promotion, the job that you have, the current position that you're in, you believe that all of that is by external factors, right? So that could be either through, you think that you got your job because of luck, right? Or you think that you got the promotion because it was just great timing, okay? Or you think you got the A on the exam and you feel like you're going to fool your professor, okay? All these different things, once again, is you feel like a fraud, but not only do you feel like a fraud, you give all your success to somebody else, right? You give it to an external factor. So that is, once again, making sure that we're crystal clear on what imposter syndrome is. And it could actually get pretty complicated, okay? Because no matter how much evidence you have, right, of the experience, the degrees, the multiple degrees that probably you do have, most likely, it's not going to fix it. That's the sucky thing about imposter syndrome. The promotions, the awards, all the acceptance letters, none of that is ever going to fix it. And the reason being is because, imposter syndrome is not a knowledge problem. We know that you know the knowledge. You know that you know the knowledge. You probably mentored and helped people get the knowledge as well. So we know that knowledge is not the problem, right? The problem is that you're not owning, right, your experience. You're not owning who you are. You're not owning your resume. Brain things that you're not competent at your job that you are doing probably an excellent job in. Probably a high achiever, all that type of stuff. Probably kill it. But once again, you're not satisfied. You don't think that you deserve where you're at. And then you get that sense of not belonging in the type of system or environment that you're in, okay? So once again, that's the definition of imposter syndrome. Crystal clear, we want to get a good understanding of that as far as what that is. And it sucks, like I said, imposter syndrome really sucks. This is a negative mindset that you're constantly in. It's a constant cycle that you're constantly going through as well. And it really just sets an unrealistic standard as far as who you are. And here's the thing that can happen with an imposter syndrome is that it can manifest in different ways, okay? So not everybody is going to manifest in the same ways, okay? So a couple different things that I want to point out to you all. So as y'all know, my name is Dr. Johnson. I research imposter syndrome. This is something that I've, once again, personally gone through. This is something that I'm currently going through. And this is something that I'm currently overcoming. And my goal with this content that I produce is just to help y'all out to get rid of that imposter syndrome, right? How can you best react to it when it does occur? Now, researchers have identified multiple ways imposter syndrome shows up. And once again, there's multiple types, or you could think of these as like personalities of imposter syndrome in a way. Each one of them makes sense. Each one of them has its own logic to it. Each one of them has its own triggers to it, right? But once again, all of these are just all different types of imposter syndrome, but we know what imposter syndrome is and what it can do. It makes you feel like you don't belong in a room, that you probably not probably, you did earn your way in. Okay. So I'm going to, in this case, I'm only going to focus on 2 of those. There's a total of 5 of these. If you are interested in that, we can talk about that later, but I'm just going to focus on 2. This is the 2 that I see the most common. And I'm actually developing the 6th one myself. So most people think that imposter syndrome is one thing, that voice in your head that tells you you don't belong. But depending on how do I say this? The perfectionist is basically, I'm not talking about somebody who's cleaning, keeping your desk clean. I'm not talking about somebody who is like very organized. I'm not talking necessarily about that. When it comes to the perfectionist and the imposter syndrome, the perfectionist is basically, they're measuring their competence entirely based on outcomes. Okay, so they believe that every single outcome must be flawless. It must be perfect. Okay, and anything less than perfection, that means that it doesn't really count as a real success. It counts in this case as evidence that something is wrong with them. And perfectionists are very hard on themselves. Some of the characteristics of a perfectionist is that, for example, you might set a standard. For example, I see this in multiple ways, just like with students. They have a standard, or they have, in this case, if you're trying to get a certification and you want to hit a 95%, but then instead of a 95, unfortunately, you get like an 85. You still pass and you still get your certification, but then you didn't get your actual standard that you had in place, right? So because you didn't get that standard in place, you feel like a complete failure, okay? You feel like a terrible person at the end of this. Or you might have to give a presentation, and the presentation probably went well. Everything that you do, I'm pretty sure you're good at what you do, okay? And everybody knows that you're good at what you do. But for example, you give that presentation, it goes really great, but then there's probably a moment, nothing's technically perfect all the time. So there's a moment in your presentation where you kind of forgot about it a little bit, but then you remembered it, still killed it, and unfortunately you were thinking that that's just not the best representation, even though your colleague said that you killed the presentation. So there's a gap between what you produce and what you think you should have produced. And this is where that inner voice starts to talk a lot of shit in your head. Okay. And that's where you get the, you ain't nothing, you're not about nothing, right? You messed up. And because you are a perfectionist, you're just not going to be satisfied. Even though, like I said, you killed it, you got the win, but the win in this case did not really count towards you. Now, I like to, I love to watch TV. I love to look at pop culture and different things like this. And one perfectionist that I constantly, like I said, once you look at these different shows and then you look at it different, like I'm older, I look at the seasons again. I recently was looking at Insecure, and I love Insecure. Molly, if y'all remember the character Molly, she was a A1 lawyer, right? She's a black attorney, strong black woman. She's in a corporate law world, right? Making big money, doing big things, killing it, beautiful, talented, one of the best attorneys in a law firm, right? And she was killing it every single season that she was in, as far as with her job. Now, on paper, right, Molly has everything down on paper. She has a dream life. But what happens with Molly every single time is that when she got recognized at work and for her wins, she would start to analyze everything she did. So most people think that imposter syndrome is one thing, that voice in your head that tells you you don't belong. But depending on the type of person you are, that might appear as a couple of different ways. So today I'm going to break down 2 types of imposter syndrome that you might relate to. And she achieves her goals for the most part by the time that she gets there. But by the time that she gets there, she's already moved on to the next goal. And that was Molly every single season. She would really kill it and hit a major milestone, and then she'll totally forget about it like she didn't deserve it. And that's probably because of the space that she was in at the time during Insecure. As y'all know, Molly was at that, big corporate white firm for a very long time. Then she eventually moved to that black firm. And you would think being at a black firm, that would kind of go away. However, it didn't go away, right? As you know, remember. Eventually, though, her therapist did help her out. So her therapist eventually has to help her see it because Molly genuinely cannot. She's so focused on the gap between where she is and where she thinks she should be that she has almost no ability to register that what she's already built is real. And this is exactly the summary of what I believe a perfectionist is. And being a perfectionist is not a character flaw. There's nothing wrong with being, you want to do a good job. You want to be, put out your best effort. That's great, right? I haven't met a whack perfectionist ever in my life. That's just something I want to be crystal clear about. You are not a whack person. Unfortunately for you, you just have a measuring stick that you just can't let yourself win, right? Because you always got to be perfect. And I see this constantly when I do these workshops, when I talk to different people, when I coach different people. I looked at different grad students, specifically those that are trying to get PhDs in the PhD programs. And most of the time what I've seen and still see to this day, even with myself, is that they spend that first semester just trying to wait for it being accepted. So most people think that imposter syndrome is one thing, that voice in your head that tells you you don't belong. But depending on the type of person you are, that might appear as a couple of different ways. So here's one thing. Or if you are in your career, you're the professional, then you get the promotion. And then instead of, just settling in, trying to figure it out, you're worried about the next thing. That's something kind of where I was doing, where I'm constantly like, okay, I hit a goal, but then I'm going to the next thing, trying to focus on the next thing to make sure that everything's perfect. Or you're like the person who's going to rewrite the draft multiple times over and over and over again, even though it's probably good the very first time, but you think it's not good enough still. So you got to write it over and over and over and over again. So your standard is very high for yourself. Once again, I've never met a whack perfectionist. And when I say whack, I mean somebody who is just not about that life, right? Not focused, not trying to achieve anything. I've never seen that with a perfectionist. However, what I constantly see with the perfectionist is that they're constantly moving the goalposts for themselves. Nobody's doing this, so you're constantly doing this to yourself, right? You hit the milestone. You set this high achievement. You don't necessarily get it. And then what happens is that you kill yourself when you still killed it, but you didn't kill it to that standard. So most people think that imposter syndrome is one thing, that voice in your head. So the number 2, right, the second type of imposter syndrome that we're going to talk about is what I call natural genius. Okay, so the natural genius, very straightforward, right? And just to be clear, right, the natural genius is not somebody who says, oh, I'm a motherfucking genius. No, I'm not saying that. This is somebody who is basically saying, right, along your journey, right? I don't know where it was. It could have been in elementary school. It could have been around your family or friends. But somewhere along your journey, you started to think that if you are cold at something, if you are really good at something, if you are competent at something, that means that competence has to come with effortless, right? It must be easy to you. It must be what they thinking about ESPN with Shaq's effortless, right? It got to be easy to you. And that if you belong in the environment that you are in the place that you need to be in, and if you are truly capable of those different things, then it should be coming naturally to you, okay? So, if it's coming naturally to you, that means what? You don't have struggle. So that is what I mean when we talk about natural genius. So the thing about natural genius is that the moment that things don't come quickly, the moment the things, you run into that wall, you know what I'm saying? Y'all know that wall that you run into in life, or you run into that first obstacle, that struggle moment, right? When you might have to study a little bit harder or something, or it might take you a little bit longer to figure out the road that you need to take, or plan it a little bit different, or you even might have to ask for help, that you didn't think that you'll need to do, right? Your brain is going to, because of, like I said, your context, but your brain is going to read that as, hey, what's going on? This is not normal for us. Right? This should be easy. This should be effortless to us, right? And because it comes with that struggle, right? You start to see that this is evidence that you're not capable. Because in your head, you're probably saying, if I were really capable of this, it wouldn't be this fucking hard, okay? That's how natural genius is thinking, right? If it ain't easy, then I shouldn't be doing it. Crazy, right? Anything worth trying, it might be a little bit hard, but if you're a natural genius, so most people think that is that, for example, like you start something new and anything. So most people think that imposter syndrome is one thing, that voice in your head that tells you you don't belong. But depending on the type of person you are, that might appear as a couple of different ways. So today I'm going to break down 2 types of imposter syndrome. But there's a learning curve. And you might say, well, because of this learning curve, I'm not built for this. So let me move on to something different. Ain't that crazy? Is that not crazy? But that's exactly what imposter syndrome is doing. You watch someone else pick something up faster than you did. There you go, start to compare, right? And instead of thinking about, well, maybe this person had more background, or they had different context about something, or they're just starting at a different starting point versus you, right? You decide that, you're not cut out for this. And you immediately are going to disqualify yourself from even going forward with whatever you're trying to do. And the thing with natural geniuses is, once again, so most people think that imposter syndrome is one thing, that voice in your head that tells you you don't belong. But depending on the type of person, okay, like the fact that you needed help feels like proof that you're not the real thing. And because in your head, you're not the real thing, right? The people that are succeeding, the people that you think, I should say, are succeeding, they don't ask for help. Is that true? That might be true. That might not be true. That might be some load of crap that you have in your head, most likely. And you think that you don't belong because of that, right? You think that there can't be a learning curve, right? You think that because of this, your competence is supposed to arrive already established. Let me tell you something. That is not real. You know what I'm saying? Imposter syndrome is all in our heads. It's all in our heads. And when I think about somebody, like I said, that I was, this didn't click until the other day, when I thought about this character. But do y'all remember Earn from Atlanta? So if y'all don't remember Earn, so most people think that imposter syndrome is one thing, that voice in your head that tells you you don't belong. But depending on the type of person you are, that might appear as a couple different ways. So today I'm going to break down 2 types of imposter syndrome that you might relate to. So the very first thing that for real is probably one of the smartest people in that show. Do y'all remember when Earn got angry at that lady, and then he made this master plan to get back at that lady, to where he basically set her up to think that she was gonna get a book, and then Earn had everybody was faking the crowd. They said the book was trash, and then they all left, and then she was feeling crazy. Like, that is remarkable. That is remarkable. That plan that he did to get that lady back, by the way. Crazy. Right? Crazy. But anyway, Earn is super smart, and he can read situations faster than most people around him. That's the reason why he was good, and he figured out managing his cousin's career. But what we saw throughout the entire season of Atlanta, especially with Earn, is that the whole show, there was a gap between how smart he is and how long it's taking for things to work. If y'all remember that first season, that was a struggle season for Earn. You know what I'm saying? And this is what I started to recognize when I started to look back at the series, and when I realized, like, hey, Earn might be a natural genius when it comes to imposter syndrome. Because, here's the pattern with Earn. He left Princeton. So most people think that imposter syndrome is one thing, that voice in your head that tells you you don't belong. But depending on the type of person you are, that might appear as the grind of staying, which he didn't necessarily match the timeline he expected for himself. Earn, if you remember that first season, he had a lot of stuff going on. He was with his baby mom on and off. He has a daughter that he's trying to provide for, even that very first episode. And then he has to prove himself to his cousin to see if he can manage his rap career. And Earn's timelines was never matching. The struggle never matched with what he thought where he should have been at that time. Right? He thought that he should have been bigger than what he was at that time. Of course, things were supposed to open up because, like I said, Earn, Princeton. So most people think that imposter syndrome is one thing. That friction, when shit started to get hard, that's where we start to see Earn really falter a little bit. When he was in Atlanta managing, his cousin Paperboy, we watched Earn make crazy smart moves. Like I said, Earn was super smart. But some of those moves just didn't pay off right then and there in the timeline. Earn was doing good things for his cousin in that first season, getting the right connects, figuring it all out. Earn was not necessarily lazy, right? That was not necessarily his issue. It was just his timeline wasn't matching to what he wanted for himself. And then as well as, this was something new that he was doing. It was a lot of struggle. It was a lot of friction as far as to figure it out and make this work. In that very first season. Now, as you know, they came up later and then it was kind of different, but he still was running to that same issue. And then what happens with natural geniuses is that, the struggle mainly happens, between I'm smart enough for this and it's not working yet. There's a gap between those two, right? Because in your head, you know that's your code, that you're smart enough, but it's not going fast. It's not easy to you, right? And the moment that it feels like it's not easy to you, it makes you feel like, well, dang, should I even be doing this? Right? Should I even be in this room with these other people? Because it looks and appears that it's easy to them. And you ain't you can't read their minds, so you don't know what they're going through. That's the reason why we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to each other. But like I said, because of that comparison that we're going to do because we're humans, that is where the friction starts to occur, because then you start to realize, well, dang, do I belong here? All right? Because it's not coming easy to me. So in real life, like I said, I see this constantly with people. I've seen this with the STEM majors, and I see this with people in STEM careers, right? But as real anything, right? Like when you do that first test, you do the first test of anything, it's hard. You don't know what to expect. It might be longer to do it the very first time. It's nothing what you thought it was going to be like. So in real life, what does this look like? This could look like you're in grad school probably, and you're noticing that you're having to study longer. And because you're having to study a little bit longer, even though you're in this very competitive grad school program that many people couldn't get in, and because you are studying longer than you previously had in your other life, you might start to think, well, so in real life, what does this look like? This could look like you're in grad school probably, and you're noticing that you're having to study longer. And because you're having to study a little bit longer, even though you're in this very competitive grad school program that many people couldn't get in, and because you are studying longer than you previously had in your other life, you might start to think, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Maybe I'm not actually cut out for this. Maybe, right, those other students belong here, because in your mind, if you have to study hard, then you don't belong here, right? Am I supposed to be here? That's the question that you might be asking yourself. That, once again, is what we call the natural genius, right? The natural genius does not believe in learning curves. Natural geniuses think that everything should come easy to them, and that if they don't get it on the first try, then that means that they are not cut out for this, okay? Now, we covered two. We covered the perfectionist and we covered the natural genius. And like I said, both of these two types of imposter syndrome, they really have what we call different measuring sticks. They measure different, right? They manifest out differently from each other. But we understand that imposter syndrome, right, is designed to make sure that you feel like you don't belong. So in both these cases, if you're a natural genius for those different reasons, or if you're a perfectionist, at the end of the day, both of these type of personalities feel like they don't belong in the space that they are currently in, okay? Now, as I mentioned, we talked about Molly, we talked about Earn, right? Now, here's what I would tell you, that if you are one of these personality traits, right, one of these types of imposter syndromes, so if you are a perfectionist, I would tell you that the goal is not to lower your standards. You're never going to lower your standards. Like I said, I never met a whack perfectionist in my life. Okay, so the goal is not to lower your standards. It's to really change what counts, right? I want you to really think about the real work. I want you to see the real work done by, a real person with real constraints and real limitations, okay? Because all those different things, the things that you're going through, life is just be life, and sometimes all those different things still count, even if you don't get the 100% that you're aiming for, right? If you get the 97%, that still counts. And that's still amazing, right? 97, last I checked, is pretty freaking good. So in this case, keep going at it. If you're a natural genius, this is what I tell y'all. The learning curve is not a disqualification. That's the main thing I need to make sure that you understand today. Because once again, all these different things are manifesting and it's making you feel like you don't belong in the space when you earned your spot that you currently are in. Okay. So understand that everything is a process if you are a natural genius, and that every person who is excellent at something went through a period of time where they weren't excellent. They wasn't good at what they were doing. Everybody knows and heard about the story of Mr. Beast, right? Mr. Beast is one of the biggest YouTubers out right now, out ever at this point in time. And if you go all the way back to Mr. Beast's videos, his very first videos, like as he says, was not that good. He was not great at it. There was a learning curve that he had to get through. But after he went through that learning curve, right, he figured it out and he is who he is today. Okay. So in that case, with all my natural genius people, you have to understand you just got to go through the process, right? And it's okay to have that struggle, right? The struggle is not proof you don't belong, right? The struggle is basically proof that you're somewhere you haven't been before. And that's not a bad thing, right? That could be a good thing, because if you haven't been in that spot before, that means that you're going to take it to another level and get to a spot that, once again, you ain't been to before, okay? So here's one thing, right, that I want y'all to think about, right? Think about those two different things that I just mentioned as far as for my natural geniuses and perfectionists. If you are one of those, please let me know in the comments. As well, drop it in the comments as far as if you would like me to talk about the other types, right? Like I said, there are 5 types. I talked about 2 of them, and I'm developing one other. If you want to hear about those, just let me know in the comments. If not, just give this video a like. Share this with somebody if you think they're a natural genius or perfectionist, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.